All right, our next stop off, Richard Puckett will be talking about the future of mobile security.
As Joe mentioned, my name is Richard Puckett. I'm the Chief Security Architect for General Electric. Sorry.
Microphone, right there.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Oh, great. I just want to open. How many people know much about General Electric as a company?
Much.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I feel every day. Yeah. That's exactly how I feel every day.
They make my refrigerator.
Yes, yes, and I can't solve your light bulb problems. Please don't tell me about that. No, I don't handle warranties for your washer or dryer either. How many people, just shout out, what do you know about GE? What do they make?
Turbine.
Turbine, jet engine.
They own CBS.
Used to. Squeal.
Television.
That's a good one, actually. Yeah. What else? MRIs, X-ray units, nuclear reactors.
People.
We make parts of people, but not full people yet. We do. 3D printers. What else? Anything? Engines, absolutely engines. So aircraft, aviation, capital, home and business. We're in every major market sector. And one of our challenges, both as a company and as what we make, is mobiles. It is the number one or number two feature request we have in every critical infrastructure domain we're in. And by the way, we're in all 18. I recently found out, I thought we were only in 17, but I found out we were actually in national monuments and icons because we make one of these big power washers for places like the Washington Monument and things like that. Holy crap, I didn't know we made that. So all 18. And all our customers want in critical infrastructure is to mobile enable X. So take this device. Everybody knows what this is, an Apple iPad. Most of the time people are concerned, if I use my iPad for what? Mobile banking or my email. I'm concerned about losing my credentials or my credit card. But what about an aircraft engine in flight? Guess what the FAA and the Pilots Association have asked for? To iPad enable engine management, right? So the guy can be walking down the
because that
flight.
connection is so well secure now.
True, but A-Course messaging, Class C messaging from aircraft, kind of innocuous, but when you start to talk about interactive, so what's the big draw? And this is kind of important because this is what I mean about the future of mobile security, is that when you think about critical infrastructure like gasification plants or energy distribution, most of those communities grew up in a very hands-on oriented world, turning a dial, moving a slider bar. Capacitive touch technologies and user interface translate those immediately to a screen. So now a slider bar can be put on a capacitive touch screen, or a dial can be turned in UI. And the learning curve is nil. And that's what's making this so incredibly attractive to critical infrastructure spaces. Now, I'm of the mind just because you can doesn't mean you should, but I can tell you that's a wave that cannot be held back. And that is what I mean about the future. It is no longer for us just about credentials or bank accounts or financial transactions, which, by the way, are still incredibly important. But now it's about protection of dams, of gasification plants, of power distribution networks, of aircraft in flight. And those are very real concerns today. So when we're looking at this problem, we're looking at it across things. Most people here, already, you're a very educated community, so at DEF CON, what happened with the insulin pump, now think across all medical equipment that may be now nurses and doctors using an iPad to control those things. And now we're talking about other ways to have catastrophic effects on human life. And so this is our problem as a company. So I'm a big fan of William Gibson, and this is my favorite quote by him. I use it a lot. And I always say that the future is already here. It's really just not widely distributed yet, and that is no more true than it is at our company today. in addition to our challenges as a company, our internal environment, somebody said, define what GE is. And we are 370,000 employees. Tack on our contractors, vendors, that's over 500,000. We have over 600 data centers and computer rooms globally. When we talk about a petabyte of internal data, that's just what we consider our intellectual property. That's not everything. We have over 12,000. We actually have a bet running. I think it's more. We have over 12,000 third-party connections to our network. And we are still one of the few remaining privately held Class A networks in existence today. We are the entire 3-dot network. We are also an incredibly flat network, and we grew up that way. In its current iteration, this is incredibly difficult to defend. This environment is very difficult from the network, from the application space. It's very, very difficult to defend. So much so, our size tends to bring us forward faster. We tend to run into problems earlier than smaller companies. So the gentleman there was talking about SSH, said that if you're a 10,000 person company, welcome to my world in SSH, right? So I don't even want to talk about that problem. But when we think about the future, and I use the William Gibson quote a lot because the future is actually already at GE in terms of threat. So we see this all the time. And for us, we're watching a precipitating event occur with mobile devices, these things. Our users love them. They get them for Christmas. They get them as gifts from our own company for good work. And they're fantastic devices. They're incredibly exciting. They're fun for children to use. They're great for learning. They are a nightmare to secure. And in this environment, that threat is amplified because now they're not only an incredibly weak device to defend, but they're a gateway mechanism to all cloud and SaaS-enabled applications. I've seen a few people in here using Evernote, very common toolkit. Dropbox, sooner. People are using cloud-based storage. And the mechanism of gateway is the 3 and 4G conversion. So you mentioned proxies and the ability to flip from proxy. Who needs a proxy anymore? I can just flip over to 4G, move whatever I want. So as a loss vector, these things are an incredible sieve for us as well. And we know, again, that this model, the old bastion model of networks, is not defensible any longer. So as a plan, we are changing, really trying to jump ahead of the problem rather than tracing these things with traditional security technologies in an environment that barely accepts these things. How many of you are in the same boat? This is like, oh my God, it's an Apple. What is that? Why is that here? Right? Get it out of here. Especially if you're working in a highly regulated industry. And by the way, we're working in almost all of them. Healthcare, finance, defense, industrial base, we see that all. So, and again, even in the environments where we have good controls over our laptops, similar to the one that's sitting in front of us today, with maybe good antivirus and good HIPS protection, not enough. Not enough because of this, the size. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but the mobile world for us is already evolved. We're living in this right in the middle of bring your own device today. We're living right in the middle of this, whether we want it or not. We're looking at the growth of mobile platforms. Every time I go down the street and I see somebody with one of these, I kind of cringe, because I see them increasingly turning to this for more and more critical things, like mobile banking. How many people here do mobile banking? Are you familiar with like the Android Rage Against the Cage, or Ginfermaster, Zipmo, Spitmo, all of the latest and greatest SMS suppression and TAN intercept capabilities on the mobiles? Fascinating malware, right? Fascinating because they are using the strength of the platform and that 3 and 4G connection to do some amazing things on these that are very incredible. They're hard to defend. So we also know that from our app space that more and more of our customers absolutely want it on this. They don't want it on this. They don't want to touch this anymore. They think this stinks, right? So somebody working on trains GE makes big trains, the Evos. When somebody wants to go out from a railhead and it's raining, they don't want to get out of their truck. They want to sit with this thing and cellular connect to a railhead station and manage trains. How many people remember the math problem? A high-speed train leaves York at, yeah, well, that's one of my night terrors, to be honest. So the other thing is cloud. We're watching cloud become a gateway changer, not only for apps on these things, but also on these. So a reverse path migration is occurring as we begin to develop more and more for this that is retrofitting to this device. So we think that's actually the direction we want to go. So this is our current, this isn't our future. This is exactly what we face across all of our businesses, and this is what our customers are beginning to see. So in a way, we're kind of reflecting what the market has as a problem. And our focus is evolving. So we're focusing on 3 concepts, and people have looked at us sometimes like we're crazy, and then other people have think that we may be doing the right thing. So I'm kind of curious to what you think as a community, because you know so much about this. You know, the first is we're kind of in an embrace the chaos situation at this point. We're at a tipping point event where we can't keep them out. It's not possible or defensible. So we're saying, okay, we're going to flip it. And it's not bring your own device, but we are going to have a broader sense of allowing your own device. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing is how we're focusing on the way we do services. So we don't really care about the device anymore, but we care how it reaches to data and services. So we're actually flipping our network. So, and I know that may sound crazy, but I'll say what that means in a minute, because we're taking our services and we're pushing them closer and closer to our edge in a step-tier model, which used to be full internet access or full VPN, and we're introducing layers in between. And I'll show you that step tier. But it includes full VDI, it includes virtualized applications, it includes a web top, and it includes portalized applications. So now we can actually push things where we're not so comfortable having access. Okay, maybe you get to it through VPN or VDI, but other things we're trying to force as fast as we can to go towards raw internet. And how many people know about their own data centers today, what's in them and how they're stacked? How well is your data center defined and what's critical and not in it?
There's a lot of the segments to protect.
Mm-hmm. How good a job do you think is done?
That's fairly well.
Fairly well?
Yeah.
Do you think that's a average for the market or above average?
I mean, I would say we're above average.
Okay.
Proxies,
Yeah.
continuously monitoring everything.
I'll ask the question differently. How many people know what their business's crown jewels are? Yeah.
Small company.
Small co. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. For us, our crown jewels are things that are worth $2 billion or more to our operations. Right? And I can't tell you how many, but there are a few. So when we think about the business process around them, when we think about the people who have to interact with them, when they think about the third parties that are part of that ecosystem to deliver them, now I'll ask the question again, how well do you know what those are and how well are they defended? Right. Not defensible. Again, in a way it's a pipe dream to chase concepts like DRM in the big sense. In small ways they're easy to do, but in large complex ecosystems they're incredibly difficult to deal with. And mobiles again become a massive loss vector because of not only what they represent in defensible platform, but also how they reach to applications and services that you don't control. And traditional MDM solutions don't cut it. So when we talk about device enablement, we're moving to the concept of designing to untrusted first, as opposed to design to trusted. Most people start with MDM solutions or BES that allow you to reach directly into your data center, but there's not really good controls over the data once they're in there. So what we're thinking about largely and doing, we're 18 months into a 5-year program to deliver this. So we're kind of in flight. We've had 3 design tacks. We've changed direction 3 times as we've been learning along the way because it's iterative. Really the concept of things like corporate persona. How many people are familiar with Enterproid or Toggle from AT&T? They're variations on one another, but it's really about putting a persona on a mobile device. So I'll date myself and say, how many people remember Windows 3.1? Yeah, horrible operating system ever. But when it first came out, no personas, right? You just logged in and used it. And then Windows 3.1.1 came along, Windows for Workgroups, and you began to have the concept of a persona. And the persona was an indefensible profile. You couldn't protect it, but at least it created segmentation on what was one user from the next on a common system. Divide, which is the product that Enterprise makes, and Toggle from AT&T, which is based off of Enterprise product, allow you to create a profile inside an iPad or a mobile device. So that now I might pin in to my iPad. I'm in the car and my kid, who loves to play Angry Birds, is yelling at me and I'm trying to drive. Here's the iPad, play Angry Birds. But when it comes to do work, I have to pin into a separate container, a virtualized and encrypted container on the device that has all my corporate apps. Now, is that great all on its own? No, because you can still root a mobile device. It's still not defensible, but it's better than nothing. And again, incremental steps along the way help improve the situation. So the encrypted cache that I can put on a personal mobile or on a corporate asset allow me to separate what is corporate from what is personal, and I can install applications into that container that I only want to be used by somebody who's doing work for the company. The second thing that we're doing that's a big push for us is a project called Tyler. And it's essentially how we're creating an application development framework that's pushed to the edge of our network. So using technologies like an XML Gateway. So instead of allowing that native reach, and somebody was mentioning how you pop a box in the DMZ and then you walk the ACL, we're trying to create a way that it's more difficult to move between the back-end systems and dependencies that support a front end, and use an XML Gateway to abstract that and secure it. Because we already know that in our environment, to scale, some of our DMZs are very incredibly hard to defend based on their dependencies to systems that reside inside our data centers.
So XML Gateway wrapping security around the web services?
Absolutely. And it's using certificate-based auth, so that from the system to the internal, and it's profiled, so that if it doesn't begin to behave as it's been profiled to behave, it's flagged and caught.
Can I ask what you guys use?
No.
Okay.
Ask me that question in 6 months.
Okay.
I'll be happy to answer it. But there's some things I'm happy to talk to you. I know you guys are scary
guess?
smart. You can guess.
Is it Pro?
No.
Data Power? From IBM?
No.
Yeah.
That's enough. You got 3 guesses. You're getting me scared now. No. So, but again, we're trying to figure out how to step tier at edge, interconnect, and core. So we're taking systems and services, pressing them to our edge, and creating XML compartmentalization, and even taking dependent services and pushing them to our edge, to where we're trying to be comfortable. And we're trying to purify what goes across our core. We're using VRF separation between our businesses, where we haven't done that before. So now it's user, DMZ, WAN, and data center traffic. And when they commingle, we have good points of monitoring, so that we can see people trying to flip or to do the lateral movement. So we're looking for lateral deny. And then in our core, we're creating crown jewel subnets. And as I mentioned, as we identify our crown jewels, we're also mapping the business processes against them, so that we can protect those more specifically, rather than trying to defend everything, as you saw at the beginning, which is not really possible. As I mentioned, with Enterprise and with some other capabilities, we're also embracing cloud storage. And I know that may sound a little crazy, but because there's so much of what we do that ends up living on these devices, the big problem is persona conflict, right? The problem of high attestation and low attestation identity. Attestation, as you know, is the new black. It used to be identity, now it's attestation. How can I attest who you are? I use my corporate identity to log into Salesforce, but then I got my Facebook or Gmail account to drop it into my Dropbox account. And how many people have ever seen the new Box.net integration with Salesforce? That's fantastic, isn't it? Hey, I noticed you're working on a Salesforce doc. Would you like to take that corporate data and put it into your personal Box.net account? I'll be happy to do that for you. Yeah, that's what they do. That's the second tier SaaS integration that is already underway. And we call it the geometry of SaaS. Because every little mom and pop SaaS provider is absolutely looking to do what? They're looking to grow and they're looking to integrate. Because integration for them means survivability. So and if you try to chase that, good luck. Because we also called it, I think I'm allowed to say it, we called it and I apologize to the ladies in the room, the venereal disease of the internet. Because what happens is now you have all the applications commingling identity of high and low, and now it's a question of where does your app boundary, where do you trust, and who do you trust? So the concept of an app store begins to become very critical for an enterprise to maintain for itself, to containerize the apps it does trust from the apps on this device that it doesn't.
So is the container something you guys developed or you purchased?
Purchase COTS solution. So Enterproid is a company that makes a technology called Divide. AT&T offers a service called Toggle. Toggle is originally built off of the Divide platform, but they deviated based on functionality. So we're
remote kill the data.
Correct. So it gives you an encrypted cache. It gives you a controlled certificate store. It gives you App Store integration within the container. And it gives you, to a degree, the ability to encrypt traffic. But that's, again, on an app basis. There's some challenges there. So this is, again, not something we've really shown too many people, but we're looking also for input on the fail points to it as well. Because the idea is we're looking at F5's Access Policy Manager, the APM, at the edge to represent a web top that we would push for applications and services to live. And if you're familiar with the web top, it looks like an app store. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Sorry. And the idea is that at the back end of it is an XML gateway that is plugged into both certificate use and to single sign-on, SSO. So identity for the device as well as the user. So now I have the ability with both higher attestation about this device being registered, and I know it's a personal device or a corporate device, and I tie that also to application behaviors, I can begin to create a policy matrix, a very simple one, mind you, of what I may present to that edge, because I can dynamically present certain things in the web top. Maybe I see that you're using your personal iPad, you have a Divide container on your device, and you're registered. I may only present you with a few things that I'm comfortable with you using at the edge. Versus the old story, which was, crap, I either got to give it to you at the DMZ, and I put data at risk, or I give you full VPN, and you kind of have run of the house. Or you get hop-off threat once I let you in. So we're trying to step tier the concept. So I'll stop there for a minute. Any questions about this?
How are you doing authentication?
Good question. So the question was, how are we doing authentication? It's not pure two-factor, though we do enforce two-factor in certain scenarios. And again, that step tier concept, which I'll show you. In order for you to get to direct from the internet, I may just ask you to provide the certificate, which happens underneath the hood. You don't see that happening as part of the auth sequence to the F5. And then you provide your SSO and password. And maybe you get to that first tier or that second tier of gateway or proxied applications. If I know the device to be one that I own, maybe it's one that I provided you as a corporate-owned asset, and you'd like to get full VPN, you would initiate that with true two-factor. So now the certificate and the registration process act as a second mechanism of validation, but it's not really true two-factor. And I can step tier up to what I present to you and based on my confidence level with the trifecta of user, asset, and location. And we are talking logical and physical location. Sure?
Are you by chance using F5 APM?
Oh, sorry?
Are you by chance using F5's APM?
So the question was, are we using F5's APM? Yes, sir, we are. So we very much like it because we've done some bake-offs with VPN technology. F5 was really the first to present that web portal experience that focuses more on the mobile device and less on the traditional PC. And the interesting thing about this in our test communities is that we find that now the PC users want this experience. They want to experience their app this way as opposed to the traditional way. So what we're also going to be doing is collapsing our desktop subnets so that they access applications the same way. So for our remote user communities in our global environments, for our partners, rather than allowing them to route deep into the 3-dot, we're going to have the same access experience to access applications and data inside our company as we do at our edge. So the idea is now taking user routes and pushing them off the network so that even inside the environment, they're not able to run across the 3-dot as they were before. And this is what it looks like right now. The long term is that we want to begin to move and get more comfortable over time with pushing apps closer and closer to the edge as the technology catches up. Because there are so many holes that are in some of these concepts now that you have to be able to move between them to create safety scenarios for applications and services at the right level of risk versus an all or nothing situation. Because right now, with mobile devices, it kind of is an all or nothing. It's very, very difficult to secure these in a way that you would allow very sensitive forms of data to reside on it directly. But we can't really impede the progress because it's already underway. In fact, that's what I meant about the future already being here. It already is. Case in point, there's a group by a gentleman named Rajiv Gupta. He is running a startup called Sky High Networks. How many people have ever heard of that? It's a fantastic technology. Rajiv originally came from Securant, and this is his second run at a startup. But the interesting thing about it is he gives you cloud telemetry. And from our network, we saw 161,000 users accessing over 1,000 different cloud providers, unique cloud providers. And that's what I mean about the future already being here. That we're chasing the problem as it is today, and we're not in a winning proposition if we chase that problem. So we have to jump ahead of it. So when we talk about certificate provisioning, a big portion of this is that we're also doing device fingerprinting as we provision certificates. So we're populating the certificate with unique fingerprint attributes of the device they're made for, such as the IMEI. And they're not perfect, but they allow us to know if a cert has potentially been harvested from one cert store and moved to another device attempting to be used. The other thing in profiling authentication, such as we're doing with the F5 and technology by Cisco called ICE, Identity Services Engine, is that we can also understand if a user is logging in more than one location, such as somebody here or in Glen Allen, Virginia, turning around and simultaneously logging in from Shenzhen, China. It helps us see that.
Are you using the ICE agent, the supplicant agent?
No.
Okay.
We're trying very hard to have no footprint on the device that we maintain. Even divide and toggle, that's a standalone instance you would download from the App Store directly. But there may be a little bit of config there, but we're trying very hard to have a zero footprint on the device. Very hard. And that's also something that has to catch up. So it's three angles. One is the angle of our confidence with the device. The second is our confidence with the access methodology. And the third is our ability to protect the data. So we're trying really just to create Lego building blocks and be able to put them together based on a policy construct that we think we can grow with as the technology catches up.
Ooh, nice transition.
You stop. So the other part we're looking at, as we mentioned about authentication with a common application store, is we're looking at external cloud resources, even like Amazon or carrier colo, such as with AT&T, where we might, at that mobile to IP gateway or with an external cloud provider, offer an integrated app store that is SAML federated. So that would be SAML federated to us, so that there's some consistency of the level of trust we're ascribing to the identity being used to get to that application, and it separates that identity from the other one that may reside for, say, a Box.net account for my personal use, versus if I toggle in or I do into a divide container a separate Box instance that understands that it's a corporate Box instance. So now I have dual persona on a common device versus what I do in life, which is carry 2 iPads and 2 mobile devices and Apple. Because this is the problem now. With increasing smartphone capability, we only know that users are going to want to more and more either use their own device when they can, or they'll get troubled by carrying multiple devices to do a single function. So this is a bit of the summary, and I'd definitely like some Q&A from you all. One is we know that traditional security models simply don't scale. They won't work with mobiles. And in fact, the more you try to plug them into traditional data center and application services, the more at risk the data becomes. The mobile application framework we're developing is to the mobile first. And the pull-through for us is that the PC world is following now what we're doing for the mobile trend, as opposed to the mobile trend chasing the PC model. And that's the interesting thing we really didn't expect that we're also seeing on our product side. Platform security focus has been largely around our device identity, the management of persona collision, or persona management, and secure storage concepts, both in cloud and on the device. So now, virtual applications that we offer, which are a blend of Citrix and VMware capabilities, that when you fire a virtual application, maybe it's Outlook, the actual storage is redirected not to the local device, but potentially to your cloud store or to an internal instance if we're not comfortable with you using it with an external store. So there's no remnant file left on the device once they're done using the app.
Is it your own cloud?
We do have our own internal cloud, but we are trying to push towards use of an external cloud provider. So we are, and I'm happy to tell, we are working with Box.net right now. We're trying to get to where we can do a good corporate integration model there. And by the way, Box wants that too, because they know it's indicative of what other companies are going to want, which is how to figure out how to tackle end user multi-tenant storage in a safe way. And there are a number of challenges there. Things like encryption, use of our keys versus theirs, so that we don't expose ourselves to things like blind subpoena. So that if somebody attempts to do a side channel attack on that cloud provider from store to store, all they get is gobbledygook because they're not using our keys. And because it's end user data, not app-to-app data, we're not having to worry about stored key models for applications to consume the content.
Is that a feature they're planning on rolling out soon, or is that something that's...
I'll let Box talk to that, but if you please talk to them, because of all the storage providers we've talked to, they seem to be the most progressive, they're thinking about how to do the corporate integration, and even the ability to control from a policy perspective in their world, integration with other SaaS providers they've offered. So they've said, we're willing to work with you on how to keep other applications from plugging in here if they're not SAML federated using your credential, which is a very powerful capability. But we know that the SaaS providers want this as well because the consumer market offers only so much opportunity for them, and they know if they can figure out how to bridge the problems of corporate integration, it's going to make their businesses explode. And we think storage is where that pivot really exists, because it's our gateway to other cloud services once we can plug it in on the public internet side to that storage model that we feel we can better protect. And that's end user cache only, mind you. It's not, so rather than storage local on this, it's at that cloud storage point, not elsewhere. Data governance has to reflect real world expectations. I hear again and again and again how either people think still that their crown jewels are locked up inside, and bless you if they are. I very much doubt it if that's true still today, even in very highly regulated industry. The data governance has to have practical means to it, and the practicality does mean you incur some risk. So this is not a zero risk model. That's completely impossible. We're trying to do is design now for untrusted systems rather than try to design for members of the trusted internal bubble, because that model is dead as far as I'm concerned. We think, really, we think identity is the new perimeter of an entity like a corporation. We don't think the network the network no longer reflects the perimeter of a corporation or a functioning entity. It's actually identity, because it extends well beyond logically your physical network brick and mortar shop.
Are you persisting that identity to identify which data somebody should receive?
Correct. Yeah, that's
classification on
yeah.
the data as well?
But not everywhere. So this is the kicker. In a big, gigantic company like ours, data classification, while we have marking, we watermark, we do all the right things, it's not really possible from a defensive strategy unless you really isolate the corporate killer data that you have. You've got to identify the data that is the most critical to you, and you've got to do the best you can to protect that, rather than try to focus on a step-tier model that has different levels of confidential and proprietary. Those kinds of data, if we lost them, it would be bad, but they wouldn't kill us as a company. So we're trying to focus on just the smaller subset of our most critical data and do the best to protect that through high wall and low wall, enclave, and crown jewel subnet models. And by pushing user traffic off of our network and purifying our WAN backbone core to only have WAN and data center traffic, it's much harder to hide. So now the signal-to-noise ratio drops tremendously because most of your user traffic is moved off of routes and the backbone of the network, that it's either in a separate BRF or it's not on there at all. And it looks anomalous because you can pattern match based on app-to-app behavior much easier when it's not commingled with user traffic. The last is, I can't stress enough, and it sounds weird, especially when I say I'm from General Electric, but we're very much into fast fail and iterative design. So as I mentioned, since we started in 18 months, we've changed design 3 times. And that's because we've been kind of ruthless about one direction we had that just wasn't working. And so we've been really consistent about killing something off and moving and changing tack to another idea. And we're going to continue to do that for a little bit longer, just because we need to get to where something can survive incubation and be a sustainable solution for the mobile edge. And I always like this quote. And we've definitely taken the wrecking bar to the network. Sir?
Did you do a bake-off between the container cut?
Wow, yeah, holy smokes. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, did we do a bake-off between container technologies? Yeah, we've even flip-flopped. We've gone back and forth. So, and what I've told that the design team working on that, is it's a marathon, not a sprint. Look at the technology that you think has the most value from an integration point, because fast fail can sometimes get you caught up in the next stage of feature set, and it won't let you look at the long-term integration that you need. So when we think about the mobile edge, we think identity is going to flip as well. We think that it's not NSTIC, but we think it'll be higher attestation identity at the public edge and a smaller subset of internal identity over time. So that smaller subset of identity would begin to control a smaller scope of our most critical assets, and then you can really watch the heck out of it if something's happening there that shouldn't be happening, while most of your applications and services move closer to the internet-facing edge. And then your user community is there all the time, and they're using it whether they're on your prem or they're off your prem. So it's not the Jericho Group's concept of borderless, but it's more like a tweener network concept, so an in-between network that's not full raw internet, but not fully off your control.
And what did you do for jailbreak detection? Your COTS container?
Right now, yeah, that's a great question. So the question was about jailbreak detection. Right now we're using AirWatch as a COT solution for jailbreak, but I'm not sure we're going to stick with that. We'll have to see. Because again, we're trying very hard not to have a strong footprint on the device, and we're trying to design for untrusted. So the flip of time where we may not continue to have a heavier install on that device may change over the next 2 years because of the way that the pace of mobile design is moving. But again, transitions say that maybe this as my GE-issued iPad would continue to have AirWatch to retain a higher trust, but this as my personal iPad, I could use internet-facing apps all day long and I'm good to go. So that concept of step tier around user, asset, and location. Sir?
I know it's not out yet, but will BlackBerry 10.
Yeah.
The fact that they're
Dual persona and
on
yeah.
the side. Can you talk about your thoughts about that and whether you think that that's the way it's going to need to go or not? Or
I don't know if, you know, it's kind of interesting. The question was about BlackBerry 10 and Bez 10, which actually has some fantastic features in it. It does have dual persona native now, which I like. I'm not sure, it may be late to the game because they're not really catching up with the rest of application integration yet. They're still very proprietary oriented and facing inward. And you know, I can understand the reason to want to continue to play to that market because that's a big penetration strength for them in corporate. So they're just playing to their market strength. But we think it's the exact opposite direction. If we don't start designing for untrusted, it's going to be an overwhelming wave. I kind of feel like some days I feel like I'm already too late. Right?
That's kind of what I was wondering there was, do you feel that Apple and Android need to adopt that? And do you think they will?
Yeah, the question was, are Apple and Android going to adopt that methodology? They already are. Android has in Jelly Bean a dual persona capability native, which I think was great. They're still not to where you can protect it at root level, but again, I use the analogy of the evolution of maybe a bad one of Windows, but think backs to VMS as well. There's always that movement towards recognizing dual persona is a good move. Apple also is thinking about that, and there have been discussions with Apple now, as anathema as it may sound, towards corporate identity integration, whereas before they were 100% consumer oriented, and even they're catching up to the fact that in order to sustain play, the consumer market, while a big portion of the market space for them, won't give them market entry to corporate if they don't begin to address some of these core issues. So we think both of them are going to begin to move, and again, it's the out direction, not the in direction. So they'll play to their strength, they'll play to the integration to the internet side, and I think that just naturally converges with the way that data is moving. I think and this was just an example of where all the areas we play as a company. I haven't updated the national monuments part yet, but I will. So, forget about it. Any questions, please?
Just a comment. I was at a fairly large defense contractor a couple of years ago, and they were realizing that they had created and invested all this time into web services and the ability to marshal data around the different locations and sites and business units. And then they came down, and I guess they were being regulated, or somebody had a good thought. They're like, there's no security on any of this. There's no way to persist identity across multiple access points or web services they call web services.
Yep.
So we had this amazing demo of privates and generals and admirals, and we were getting coordinates with the Taliban on Google Maps. And we were experimenting a lot with a couple different XML firewalls and technologies. And they worked tremendously well. I went on a couple gigs with IBM and Layer 7 to different healthcare providers, different banks, and they were using persisting. Basically, somebody would log in, you keep your standard LDAP authentication repository, and it would create this SAML token that would then have a time limit of how long this identity was allowed to persist.
Right.
And we could wrap it across every single point that hit internally, and then when we were doing external, which I think you guys have separate business units as well, that may be external sometimes, or the third parties is a good example, is that you could actually put cert stores in place and communicate 100% encrypted with, still persisting the identity across into somebody else's environment that they can then marshal around that identity as well. So just as a comment, I think it's a great plan. It should work well.
Well, your last comment about search, I know you said a couple things there that were really interesting, but the last comment about certificate realm and authority is really kind of a very attractive thing. We're trying really hard not to rush to, because we have seen people overcomplicate what they've done with certificate realm and authority on the web services side to the point of absolute horror. We're trying to keep everything gross-grained to start, because we want to get some basic capability in place. But we do believe over the long haul, there are two weaknesses in this model. And I'll ask the question, what you've heard. What are the two main weaknesses in this model, knowing we're going this way, that you see?
The management zone is a complete access gateway to every network on your enterprise.
Partially true, because remember I said edge, interconnect, and core. We're also changing the internal side that you don't have transitive or lateral movement any longer. Even if you hijack a host on the inside, you don't have we have lateral deny now, because it doesn't mean you can't do secondary exploit to get elsewhere, but native routing won't let you go between the businesses any longer. So like right now, aviation and healthcare can talk to each other, but tomorrow that won't be the case.
Okay.
So even if I get into, say, healthcare's third-party OLC, I get into their third-party MRI systems, and I walk into that third-party connection, I might root a box, try to do an SSH or a hop-off to somewhere else. I can't any longer, because we're isolating those networks now. So healthcare is just healthcare.
So you don't have like one, WAN storage team that has access to all the WAN?
That's some of the things we're trying to basically cordon off, as I mentioned, with even the VRF side. Because if you're on a user subnet and you're on a 3-dot address in Milwaukee, and you're attempting to hit an aviation zone, another user subnet there, it's going to get spotted right away because of the segmentation of user from WAN from data center. So we're not allowing, right now it's all commingled. So it's the tick problem, the Einstein problem when they first did tick. When they traded off one problem for another by collapsing all the gateways, they stuck all the data in, and then they had an attribution problem, right? So we're addressing also IP foundation, because we're taking user subnets and we're kicking them off 3-dot. So now they're no longer, unless they're coming in through this abstraction zone, they're no longer going to have native access to the data center. Now, you touched on the real heart of the problem, which is it's actually the app layer. Once you get into the XML Gateway, that does have the more lateral reach across the network. So that's one. The second is there's still a dependency on the strength and quality of identity, especially the app identity and the device identity. That we know that's a hurdle for us, which is why we're trying to do this step tier model right here to push lower trust devices to access a smaller subset of services at our edge, and let higher trust devices and users come in via VDI and full VPN.
Have you guys considered IPv6 with IPsec?
Yes.
Yes,
Did I mention it's one of the last remaining Class A networks in existence? Yeah. Our IPv4 address space, we're about 66% allocated right now, and we have plenty of v4. But v6 is another thing we know we have to address in this redesign, because a v6 hop for us we know is not going to be done by WAN core. It's going to be pressure, or supercore. It's going to be actually pressure from apps. So we know we have to be IPv6 ready, and if we can push apps and users to the edge, it's a smaller subset of v6 we have to attack early, which is the app layer. So we know that's better, but v6 scares the crap out of me right now. Sorry. Sir, yeah.
So we had identity store, and you had LDAP, and Federated, and IDP on there. So what does the identity store look like, and what's the role of Active Directory?
Wow. So that's a great question. So the question was, at GE, what's the role of Active Directory? I'm going to show this slide again, because we have over 150 different sources of identity, and Active Directory plays multiple roles, and even individual businesses have their own directory infrastructures, whether they're Sun1, LDAP, Active Directory. So they serve different functions. Largely, Active Directory today has a native function for primary internal login today, but not in all instances.
So you're using the LDAP for the SAML type users? That's
Correct.
primarily what that's there for?
Correct. For external. And we're looking at identity flip as a big model for us. So because we know we've got to kick users off the network to figure out how to do this better, because it looks like that every day. That's why I don't sleep. I'm actually 22 years old. Sir.
One of the big things you guys seem to build are products with a really long shelf life, like power plants. What do you feel about legacy devices, like MRI devices running NT40 and
That's a great question.
Towers and also partner connections. I've been on the other side of dozens of your partner connections, and I don't see any of this going out, to people who need to, hit the API for a tower or whatever, power plants.
You're asking a fantastic question. So the question was, what are we thinking about legacy? So my other job we recently took up was a program called CyberWorks, and it's a play on GE Works. If you've heard of the GE Works strategy. 2 minutes. Thank you. Sorry. Really, this has a shelf life of 18 months. We make equipment that has shelf lives of 18 years. So what we're doing in design now is attempting to make upgradable capability that allows us to virtualize what we're doing on the platform with enough processing power that we can change the virtual entity that rides on top as a trusted platform, and we're talking aviation quality trusted.
What about like the really regulated environment you work in, like in healthcare? You know, if you have to have everything signed off by the FDA, and that's a 3-year process. That's what you guys have a little crap in there anyway.
Exactly. So think about virtualize, encapsulate, or isolate. So for real legacy, like take the D20, we have to isolate that. That's a technology we have to issue intent to warn letters, tell people it's time to mothball that, I know. And by the way, that's everywhere. It's still the technology is around. But we have to come up with better strategies to isolate it. We can encapsulate. So take Modbus RS-232, we pump that into a packet of TCP/IP network, and you encapsulate it. IP encapsulation for routing over TCP/IP networks, and then virtualize. We have to figure out how to virtualize some of these legacy platforms, because to leave them in their legacy state means they're vulnerable. That's a whole other topic, to be honest. So, I mean, what we're doing to defend legacy, this is the Achilles heel of all established nations, this legacy.
You can come back and talk about that one.
Absolutely. That's a huge program for us. In fact, I'm starting a new red team function for the company to do customers in critical infrastructure. So. Any other? I know I got one.
That has to be the last question, but we have a Q&A room right next to our...
IRC's loved it too, just so you know. Yes,
oh, thank you.
Really good talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.